Hey guys, Dylan from Noble Records coming at you with another video. The question I get asked more than any other question is, where do you find all these collections? How do you do it? How much do you pay for these collections? What are some tips? Help me out. Help me do what you do. And so I thought I would sit down, jot down a few notes of just tips I could give you guys for going out there and buying collections. You know, when I first started out, there wasn't a lot of people doing this. I didn't cross paths with anybody that did it. There were other people in the area that did it, but I didn't know them. And as time has gone, there's been a craze of buying collections and selling online and making money doing records. And I think that comes with a lot of people that they've been collecting for a really long time, and they start to sell off their collection and they realize they can make a little money doing it. And I think that's great. I mean, that's how I started out, and it's kind of grown into its own thing. So whether you are just freshly starting to buy and sell just a little bit and you just kind of want to do it for some extra record money, or something you want to do for a full-time job, I feel like these tips are going to help you out. So people ask me where I find them, what do you do when you find them, how much do you offer, all that stuff. So we're going to cover all that stuff in this video. I sat down, I took some notes, and really want to give you guys the best possible information that you could have and going out and look for record collections. Somebody asked me the other day, what's the biggest loss you've ever taken on a record collection that you bought? And it's funny, I've never lost on a record collection that I've bought, because I have tried to make really good decisions and not really roll the dice that much. Just really go on what I know and not taking many risks. So you don't have to take a risk if you know what you're looking at. The first thing that I would tell you guys is, when you do find a collection, to pay well. First of all, you know, when I first started out, I was going to yard sales. You know, you could find them on Craigslist. Now they're really hard to find on Craigslist. But when you do meet people, when you're in front of a collection, try to be fair and honest with people. I'm not going to go too deep into that, but if people feel like they've been treated well, they'll refer you to other people. And I can't tell you how many record collections I get from referrals and word of mouth and all that stuff. I've gotten some of my absolute best collections from people that call me and say, hey, you know, so-and-so said you bought their collection from them, you were very nice, you were respectful, you paid them fairly, and I think it's time for me to sell my collection. So I get a lot of that. So pay well, treat people right, be honest. Secondly, is to get to know people in your community that buy and sell records. Get to know collectors, whether it's hanging out at record stores or you know, getting to know your friends, other collectors, whatever you got to do to get to know other collectors in the area. Those are people that you can learn from, and also people that you can buy from if they get to the place where they need some extra money. You know, a lot of my buys come from people that I've known for years. You know, people say, well, how do you come across all this? So lucky. You're so lucky to get all this stuff. And really, it's not luck. It's hard work. And you know, like my last big haul, it was a friend of mine I've had for 7 or 8 years, and he got to where he was ready to sell some stuff, and I was the first to contact because he knows me well. So a lot of it comes along with making community with people, getting to know people really well, treating people fairly, and just getting plugged in the local vinyl community. Whatever you got to do to make that happen. That's one thing that's really helped me out. It's just getting to know people to where you're their first call when they decide that they want to sell some records, because we all get in a position to where we need some extra money and we sell off part of our collection. That happens all the time. It's happened to all of us, I know. So one of my biggest tips would be get to know collectors, so when they go to sell off part of their collection, you're their first call. Another tip is, don't be afraid to travel. If you find out a collection's 2 hours away, get in the car, make a day of it, drive. You know, that's what I do, and I don't really talk much about the times that I drive 2 hours and come home with nothing. And it does happen. It happens a lot. You know, you see my big hauls and all the stuff I buy, and you think, oh man, you know, every time he goes out, he strikes gold. And that's not the way it is. Lots of times, just the other day, I drove all the way to Greensboro. It was like 2.5 hours, and came home with nothing. You know, the guy couldn't make a deal with the guy, and it just struck out, and it sucked. I spent gas money and time and all that driving all the way up there and didn't get anything. That happens sometimes. It happens a lot. Or somebody will say, I got really good stuff, and you drive up there and it's a bunch of Herp Alpert and Tijuana brass, and you're like, what is this? You know, so don't be afraid to travel. It's risky when you travel. Sometimes you don't But ask questions before you go. If you're going to travel, call and just say, hey, what are some examples of artists you have? Can you text me pictures? A lot of times I'll say, hey, why don't you take a video on your phone of you flipping through some records so I kind of get an idea how many you have. You know, another thing, sometimes people say, I've got this amount of records. The average person, they don't really know how to look at a box of records and know how many's in there without counting them. So I've had people say, hey, I've got 5,000 records, and me coming over to their house, and they've got 300. And I'm not joking. I'm not joking at all. I've had people say that. Say, I've got about 5,000, and you come over there like, what? But sometimes people, they can't judge it because they're not around it that much. Some of my biggest buys have been out of state, you know, 2 or 3 hours away. So a lot of times before I go get in the car and drive that far, I ask the questions before so I kind of know. And I even ask them, like, what are you expecting to get out of this? How much money are you expecting to get from this? So if they're going to be like, hey, I want $30,000 for these records, you know, I've gotten that position to where I've driven and met with people and the record's been good, all that's great. And I say, how much you want for them? And they want way more than they're worth. And then I end up not making a deal. So it's important that you kind of get an expectation from them, and you kind of know what you're going to look at before you get there. Another question I haven't answered yet that everyone's dying to know is, how do I find them? Where do I find these leads at? That's a question. That's the number one question I get is, where do you get these leads? Because everybody wants to know what the secret is. Everybody says, what's your secret? Where do you get these leads at? The secret is, you're not going to want to hear this, but the secret's hard work. And I shared this in a podcast. It's not only hard work today, it's hard work 5 years ago. It's hard work 10 years ago. The hard work builds on itself to where you get that word of mouth, you get a reputation in the area, and you build up your knowledge, and you kind of know where to look. You know, that comes along with being creative in your area. You know, if like, let's say you're in an area where there's a lot of guys looking, think about where they're not looking. Think about the places that they're not covering. That's, you know, taking out an ad in the newspaper, putting up signs on the side of the road, hanging flyers in your post office. Be creative on how you can get your name out there to people that, hey, I buy records. That's what people need to know. They need your name and phone number, and they'll call you, and you'll get hooked up. But you got to be creative on how you get your name out there and how people are going to find out about you, because if you do what everybody else does, you're going to be competing with everybody else. You got to be creative on how you do that. Another thing is, you know, if this is something you're just going to do just a little bit, it's going to be frustrating for you. The reason why I find so much is that it's my life. This is my job. I do it every single day, every single minute of every day. I'm looking for record collections, or driving to look at record collections, or buying record collection, or pricing records. Like, this is what I do all the time. This is my full-time job. I probably work 60, 70 hours a week on records. So it's something that it consumes my time, you know. And but at the same time, it's what I'm able to give all my attention to. So if you're really wanting to buy collections, you're really wanting to get out there and find the good stuff, it takes time, it takes effort, and it takes knowledge. You know, my last point on that is it's a lifestyle sometimes. You really got to put your time and effort into it. It takes a lot of time to do this type of stuff. The next kind of criteria of questions that I normally get are, you know, after you find the collection, you know, how do you know how much to pay, all that stuff? What are some tips you give to people? This is crucial. Number one tip, when you find a record collection, you're there, you're looking at it, take your time. You know, a lot of times, I cannot tell you how many times I've been looking at a collection and the seller's trying to hurry me up. That tells me they want me to go ahead and hurry up and pay them, because there could be something in here that they're wanting to, you know, pull the wool over my eyes, you know, and that happens a lot. Usually if the seller's trying to hurry me up, I slow them down and I take my time even more, because I need to know what's in there, and if they're trying to hide something from me, I need to know. Take your time. Don't be pressured to hurry. You need to be able to take your time if you're going to put your money into this collection. So you're looking at the records. They seem good. They're good titles, all that stuff. You need to check the collection. Sometimes, I mean, in the past, early on, I would find records and I'll be like, oh man, these are great. And then I just buy them and then take them home, and they're trashed or they're warped. You know, pull the records out. Pull the vinyl out. Look at the vinyl. Make sure that there's no water damage, and a lot of times you open up the gatefold and there'll be water damage inside the gatefold that you couldn't have seen from the outside. So inspect the records, make sure they're in good shape, make sure they're not too scratched up, make sure they're not warped, make sure they're not water damaged. Warped, scratched, water damaged records are worthless. You can't use them. Don't buy them. So that's the number one thing, is take your time and check the condition before you buy anything. Another tip I'll give you, this helps me out a lot, is to ask questions. You know, when I get a record collection, the first thing I do while I'm looking at it, there's somebody sitting there watching you look through their records. Might as well make conversation with them, right? So you ask them, hey, are these your records? Sometimes they'll say, yeah, I collected these back in the 80s or whatever, or they'll say, that is my dad's collection. And so you kind of get to know their affiliation with the records. So that helps you understand, okay, this person's emotionally invested in this collection. They collected themselves. Or this is sentimental because it's their dad's collection or their grandpa's collection, or they found this in a storage locker and they're not really that connected to it. So it gives you an idea when you start to negotiate, you know, what their expectations are going to be and how attached they are to these things. The more attached they are, sometimes the harder it is to make a deal. And it kind of prepares you, but also, you know, the more you know about the collection, the better. So I always ask, are these yours? Where'd you get them? All that stuff. The history behind the collection. And also, it's interesting. Another tip I'll give you, and this is very important, is only buy what you know. Early on, when I was first buying collections, you know, I'd see a whole lot of records there, and I'd just buy a ton because there was a lot there, and I thought, how could I lose? But then I started to catch on that sometimes there's dealers that they pick out all their crap, you know, and that like they'll go through and pick out all the good titles they can sell, and then all the junk left over that's, you know, Mantovani and Classical and Herb Alpert, like I said, all that stuff that's like really hard to sell, they'll just get a big lot of like 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000, and they'll try to sell them on Craigslist or something. So you'll go up and you'll see all these records, and you'll think, surely there's enough in here to make money, and there's not. So you don't want to get stuck with a bunch of junk records because you can't get rid of them, and they're heavy. So only buy what you know. So when you're looking through the collection, pick out the ones that you know that you want to buy. There's some risk involved. Sometimes you see some and you're like, I don't know what that is. I don't care how long you've been doing it. You're going to see records you don't know what they are. There's some blind buys and stuff that happen, but for the most part, you got to pay for what you know. You know, there's certain times you get to a record collection where you're like, hey, can I pick some out and buy them? And sometimes they say, yeah, that's fine. Just pick some out and buy them. Or sometimes people will not sell you just a few records. They don't want you to cherry pick. They want you to buy the whole thing. And say, that's fine, I'll buy the whole thing, but I'm not paying for junk. And you don't have to tell them that. You think that in your head. That's your conscience speaking. But I'll go through and I'll pick out the ones that I can actually sell. Yeah, I'll buy every one of them, but I'm only paying for the ones I know I can sell. So in other words, if you're looking at a record collection, there's 500 records there, and you go pick out 50 records that you know are worth $10 each, you can make $500 on these 50 records. Don't give them $500 because then you won't make any money. You got to give them what you're comfortable paying and making $500 at the end. So if you know that you can make $500 and you're comfortable with making half, give them $250, and that's for everything. You get what I'm saying? So don't pay for the junk that you can't sell, basically. I never do. I only, like if there's a huge collection that say you got to buy the whole thing, that's fine, but I factor in how many of these are going to be junk, how many of these I'm going to have to move around until I've got to pretty much throw them in the garbage or find somebody. I've got people that'll pay me like 10 cents each for them, and I just sell them in bulk. So I got to factor all that stuff in. So just don't get rushed. Don't think, well, surely there's enough in here to make money. Don't think that, because there might not be. So again, you know, a big question I get is, what do you offer for records? That's a case-by-case deal. You know, if I'm dealing with a friend and I know him really well and I can trust that the quality's there on the records, I might offer him a little bit more. You got to factor in, like, how much am I going to make in the end? You got to think about that stuff. You got to think, okay, at the end, if I buy these records and they're, you know, loosely estimate how much you're going to make in the end. If you're comfortable making 50%, offer them half of what you'll think you'll make. If you're only comfortable spending 30% to make 70%, spend 30%. But you got to be comfortable, so only offer what you're comfortable offering. So that's a general thing. I mean, some people I know, they'll pay, 75% of what something's worth to make the 25%. And sometimes it's worth it, sometimes not. So you got to know what you're doing, and you got to know what you're comfortable with, and you got to do it enough times to really know. I mean, sometimes you get burned, so you got to factor in the risk. Another thing I get is people say, man, you're so lucky. You're so lucky you find records everywhere. I could never find records like that where I'm at. I used to see people that bought big collections. I used to think the same thing. Like, man, they walk out their door and there's just vinyl falling out of the sky. That's not how it is. It's not that I'm lucky. One of my favorite quotes is from the Roman philosopher Seneca. I heard this. Somebody told me. One of my managers told me this when I was a car salesman back in the day. When I was a young buck, I was a car salesman for a little while. But he said, luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And that's a quote from Seneca. But that is a very important, it's one of my favorite quotes because it's so true. Luck isn't real. There's no, there's a little bit of luck. Like when you play poker, there's a little bit of luck, but a lot of it's skill. So it's luck is when preparation meets opportunity, so you have to prepare for when you get in front of records, you know what you're looking at. So number one thing I would do is study labels. There's a lot of times I find a record, have no freaking clue what it is, but I know that it's on Map City or something, which is whatever the label is. If it's on Blue Note, if it's an old Prestige with the 63rd, if it's the right label, you got something good. Another thing, there's a lot of people that go into a thrift store and they go through the records and they pick out the ones that look interesting and they get on their phone and they look up on Discogs what each of them's worth, and then they buy the records based off that, and that's fine, whatever. But Discogs does not always work. About 6 years ago, I was in the mountains with my wife. She was pregnant at the time. Not really relevant to the story, but she was very pregnant with my first son, and we drove up into the mountains to this guy's. He had a single wide trailer, and that trailer was full of records, and he didn't live there, but he stored all his records in this trailer. And so he was I can't remember what he was charging, like $1 a record, but he let me come up there to look. We got up there, and our phones were bricks. They didn't work at all. There was no service at all. So there's no looking up records to see what there were. So I had to basically go off of the labels I was seeing and the artists I was seeing and pick out a bunch of stuff. And a bunch of it was actually really good. But it was a bunch of jazz stuff and all that. I mean, not all jazz is worth money. Not all blues is worth money. Not all rock's worth money. You've got to know what you're looking at. You cannot always trust that Discogs is going to work for you, because sometimes you get into areas, a lot of times I get into areas, I don't have any cell phone service at all. So, and also Discogs is not always that accurate. When you look at the median price, that's not always what it's worth. It all depends on the copies that have sold in the past. Sometimes if you get 2 really beat up copies and that's all that's sold, you're going to get a really low estimate on what that album's worth. Or if you got 2 albums that were mint that both sold, at really high, you're going to get a way high estimate of what that album's worth. And so Discogs is not always accurate. There are people running Discogs pages, and sometimes errors get through, and sometimes people don't know what the heck they're talking about. So Discogs is not what you need to live your life by. If you're going to look up the value of a record, I'll give you a little pro tip. Popsike.com, popsike.com. is what I always use, and that is auction records for like the past 10 years. It's about 10 years, maybe even a little bit more, but stuff that is sold online, I think it's just eBay, but it lets you like filter it for the latest ones that have sold or the highest price, or however you want to look at it. And so that's a way you can really find out what something's worth. Last tip I'll share with you in determining the value of the records that you're finding. This will help you with pricing records. This will help you with what you're going to determine what you're going to pay for a collection. Is studying record stores. Going to record stores and seeing what they're asking for the records. Studying sold auctions from eBay. Studying what those records are going for. looking through Instagrams. Like I follow a ton of record shops on Instagram, and a lot of times they'll flip through their new arrivals, and you can see what every one of them's priced at. So I try to memorize like what certain records are going for. So when I'm going and pricing records, you know, certain records you have to look up because you're not sure of the pressing or whatever. But when I get a copy of Fleetwood Mac Rumors, I know what I'm going to price it at, depending on the condition. When I get the Cars or Bob Seger or, you know, Bruce Springsteen or whatever, common titles that you get all the time, I don't have to go look up every single one. You know, I can flip through and kind of remember what each album goes for. It ends up saving time, and it ends up giving you more knowledge on how much to pay for each collection. I hope this video is beneficial for you guys. I really try to sit down and think of some notes that would really help you guys out when you're going out looking for record collections. I know it's a scary thing to do when you're gambling some money on whether or not this is going to be good or not, but just, you don't have to gamble. You don't have to roll the dice. You don't have to take a risk. If you study and you know what you're looking at, you can really do well on record collections, and it can be a good side source of income. So, thank you guys for watching so much. If you like what you saw, I do a lot of YouTube videos. Subscribe to the channel. Also, post everything I buy, like all the big record hauls and everything I get on Facebook and Instagram. The links to those are in the description of this video. And also, if you want to buy a t-shirt, a hat, or some stickers, the link to our store is below as well. Thank you guys so much for watching. We'll see you next time.